too. He was alone against the world in a more paranoid way, I think. Less of a breath of openness and more of a fight against the world. So when he speaks tragically, so for me, that is not quite where I am at with my courage. My courage is more about allowing the negative and the positive through me and standing in that tension. He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how. And I think that is key. That is absolutely key. Frankl was right to lift that and make that such a central part of his philosophy. Because it is true that if you are to stand on your own just with this holding of the tension, things go wrong. It's a bit like trying to ride a bicycle in a stationary way. But when you get on your bicycle and you start pedaling and you know where you're going and you have a direction of travel, then you will keep in balance. No matter what, if you have enough speed and you have enough confidence in your skills, and they become part of you, of course, you don't need to think about it, and you know where you're going, then you will be going. No matter what. I speak as a Dutch girl who spent the first 18 years of her life on a bicycle through hail and rain and whatever, you knew you had to just keep going. And that feeling of going on your bicycle and needing to know where you're going, that is basically how I see life in many ways. Now our friend Heidegger, who isn't always our friend, also contributed something very valuable to the literature, and this I did my doctorate on his theory of authenticity and inauthenticity, and this is kind of the lesson, the core of the lesson that I took from Heidegger, which I do think is valuable. He understood that we try to be pusillanimous most of the time, which means most of the time we try to hide ourselves. We try to stick our head in the sand. We try to avoid things. We try to play it safe. We try to be small because we are afraid. We are afraid that things will get difficult. Well, the whole point is to welcome the difficulty and to know that this is what you're here for. That's what human existence is. It is about standing in the wind and the rain and knowing the difficulty can be tackled, can be faced, can be solved. We are problem solvers. We human beings, we solve problems, we face difficulties, we build strength and courage, and with that we learn to make the world a better place and love each other. So Heidegger said, we close off our freedom to breathe, our freedom to be. We close it off to keep anxiety at bay. That is key. Recognize it in yourself. You do it all the time. You're doing it now. I'm doing it now. I'm terrified because I'm going to sing a song for you in So we let ourselves be taken over by the world in fascination. We get distracted. We fall in with other people. We disperse ourselves. We give them the power. We tranquilize ourselves with protective sheltering. We back away, we seek comfort, we shirk the tasks in front of us, we postpone them. We get into the rapture of forgetting, closing off, covering up. We are not transparent, we become opaque to ourselves, to other people, to the world, to life. So life can't reach us. We evade, we flee, we distract ourselves, we become irresolute and alienated. that is inauthenticity. It is about negating who we are. It is an unowned existence. So those are the things that Heidegger teaches. And his solutions are twofold. The early Heidegger, which is the Heidegger that became a Nazi, and that is very clearly where he went wrong. The early Heidegger of being in time, his solution was Entschlossenheit. What does that mean? Resoluteness. That's your Nietzsche for you. That is the fighting person who says, me. I am the authentic person. Look at me. Take me seriously. I'm going to impose my will. He actually says in Being and Time at some point that once you have become authentic, from there on you know about other people, whether they're authentic or not, and you then have the right to set them straight. Well, I do not believe this is how it works. I believe the community of human beings, every single person, is a little star in the firmament, and all of us matter equally. And therefore, any theory that tells you about superiority is going in the wrong direction. And I think Heidegger, to his credit, did know that. And the later Heidegger, of course, saw it all very differently. And instead of talking about resoluteness, he talked about Gelassenheit, which is the letting be. And what is it the letting be of? It's the letting be not of yourself. It's the letting be of being with a capital B. This is exactly what I started with. Learning to allow the being to actually shine through you, to just be a transmitter of being. I believe that's what we are for the 80 or so years we dwell on this earth. We are transmitters of being. That's all we are. But that's a big task, you know. So your task is to transmit that being as best you can with your talents, not somebody else's talents. It's your challenge, every one of you, your challenge to find what you have been given and how you can let that shine to transmit being and to let it be. And so there are plenty of other things I could be thinking about, but I don't want to take up too much time. So Socrates, of course, said you need to start reflecting on life. You need to actually think about your assumptions, what you're talking about, what you're doing. It's very important. I'll just mention Marcus Aurelius, because the Stoics were very good about courage. It's not death that a man should fear, but he should fear never beginning to live. And that is precisely what I was talking about earlier. So really, the first act of courage is to face life. I will skip Aristotle and the Epicureans and the skeptics and the Stoics. So many people talked about these things. You know, it's amazing. All these people over history who have lived and who have feared and who have struggled and who have left their little marks in the sand for us to pick up, to make it a little bit easier for us. They're all my friends, as far as I'm concerned. Anyone who has bothered to work it out and to leave a trace of memory for us to pick up, I think that's wonderful. Confucius said a very important thing, and we often forget it. If you would perfect your work, you must first sharpen your tools. And to learn to have existential courage, you need to also know that you can be confident that you can do it. I was talking about riding your bike. Well, you have to learn to ride a bike first. And somebody has to learn to make a bike, and somebody has to be able to fix it for you when it breaks down, or even better, if you can do it yourself, ain't they? So yes, to be able to have the skills and to get things right, that is a good start for getting the courage to be. The Japanese know a thing or two about this too. They talk about miraki, which is doing something with total love and with a pure soul. I think this matters greatly. To leave a little piece of yourself, of the best of you, in your creative work. And to figure out what that is, this lovely ikigai thing can really help. To ask yourself what your passion is, what your mission is, what your vocation is, and therefore what your profession will be. To find the sweet spot of life where you will feel you're able to be courageous. So we must all believe that we are gifted for something, because you are, because you've been gifted your life. And that we can find that thing and attain that thing, whatever it costs. That's Marie Curie, a very brave woman. So, finding courage is not about becoming reckless or doing things that are dangerous. It means to accept possible losses, grief, hurt, and death, and to find your fortitude, your inner strength, to find your trust in yourself and your love of life, and also your endurance. And life becomes much brighter when you allow it to shine through you instead of cutting it off and shutting it down, which is what so many people are doing all of the time. It's about getting a wider perspective and getting that sense of purpose and direction that makes it all worthwhile. One more borrowing from Heidegger. That's another thing I took from him that I've never forgotten. It was actually my father who picked it up in my thesis when he read it. He underlined, was the only thing he underlined in my dissertation. Heidegger said, potentiality is always more than actuality. What is possible for you is always greater than what you have realized to date. Think about it. You are here to realize being in the world. You've only done it a little bit. You'll do it a little bit more today, having thought about this, and you'll do it a little bit more tomorrow, and so on and so forth. And every day of your life from here on is a chance to develop some of all the potentiality that you have been given to develop in this life. So that is my hopeful message for you, and do it with movement, engagement, in action, and see life as an adventure, because that is where your courage will grow. And when you don't have to be perfect about it, because you don't, you just have to do it. It doesn't matter how you do it, you just have to do it. Then you can actually get good at it. So that's my image of existential courage, this wonderful sculpture which shows the person standing strong in the wind and letting it go through, not being a resistance against it, but allowing it through you and trusting that you're vital enough to allow that to happen. I have two final examples of what I regard as great courage that I would not be capable of myself. I know I would not be capable of it, and I have such respect for people who can do that. It's like Nelson Mandela, holding out in prison for how many years was it? 15 or something insane, knowing that he stood for the right thing, no matter what. Navalny, who could have been safe and is in prison and getting poisoned. How do you do it? How do you find that kind of strength? All these refugees, they break my heart. absolutely break my heart. I can't stand what Britain is doing to these people, letting people drown in the sea who are desperate. How can we do this to each other? Think about the future, what's going to happen with climate change. We're going to have the courage of standing in the breach together, okay? We're going to have to help each other, not destroy each other. No, I hope very much that you will see a little bit of my courage, despite my sensitivity and my vulnerability and my tearfulness. I do have great courage. I have learned to have courage. And one of the ways in which I've shown to myself I have courage is to actually start recording the songs I have written all my life. From when I was 15, writing songs and singing them with my guitar has been my way to remind myself who I am and that I can take the rubbish and the crap that's being thrown at me all the time.
We're ready to move on to our second presenter, Gideon Menda, who is a doctor of existential psychotherapy and counseling, an existential psychotherapist and supervisor and also a trainer and lecturer. He is founder of the Existential Psychotherapy and Counseling and Training Program at the Kibbutz College in Tel Aviv, and he is chair-elect of FEDE, of the Federation for Existential Therapy in Europe. So, Gideon, we are all ears and waiting to hear what you have to say.
Isn't this woman inspiring? So, about a week ago, on the 25th of April 2023, Israel, the country I live in, marked its National Memorial Day. Some of you might have heard my presentation during the previous World Congress for Existential Therapy in Europe. Back then I shared with you that I was named after my uncle Gideon, the older brother of my mother, who was killed in the Israeli War of Independence when he was 18 years old. 8 years after my uncle was killed, my grandfather passed away. Just before he died, my grandmother, trying to figure out what was happening, asked my grandfather, "What do you feel?" He replied with one word only: agony. That was his last word. For 8 years, he lived with agony until his heart and soul could no longer tolerate the pain and guilt that accompanied his daily life. The loss of a child is an extreme existential borderline experience. Such an experience takes one's level of existential awareness to its highest possible level. It does not enable any way of escaping the ontological givens, nor of escaping the pain and the agony that accompany the deepest understanding that us, human beings, are governed by ontological givens. Paradoxically, the more authentic life one leads prior to the encounter of such an existential borderline experience, the greater agony one experiences, since living an authentic life means from the beginning accepting one's freedom of choice, thus claiming immediate responsibility. Hence, we can therefore see that encountering an existential borderline So we can therefore see that encountering an existential borderline experience leads to higher levels of existential awareness and thus to greater level of pain. The same principle applies to existential anxiety too. The term thrownness, a basic Heideggerian term, reminds us that at birth we are thrown into a world with certain ontological givens. These are the fundamental elements that are part of existence and are beyond our control. We also know that traditionally, the existential approach points out several ontological givens that challenge us most. These givens include our mortality, our loneliness and isolation, our freedom of choice, and living in a meaningless world. Throughout life, we move through 3 levels of existential awareness that relates to these ontological givens. The first level is no awareness of the ontological givens. This is the level of awareness we are thrown into this world with. At this level of awareness, we are living without knowing of or being in touch with the ontological givens. We can compare this level of awareness pretty much to the biblical story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. The naive life Adam and Eve were able to live before tasting the forbidden fruit, life with seemingly no awareness at all. The second level of awareness is the safe enough awareness. At this level of awareness, we are aware of the ontological givens, but we do not accept their relevancy to us personally. We either hold on to an illusion of invulnerability, deny the relevancy of the ontological givens to us personally, or truly believe that we are not part of the same story of the ontological givens. This level of awareness allows us to live peacefully and quietly. In a way, this level of awareness is pretty much like the biblical story of Noah's Ark, in which Noah built an ark of gopher wood, protecting himself and his beloved from the threatening floods around him, saving himself from being affected by the heavy storms surrounding him. The few people who were lucky enough to get inside that gopherwood ark could see the storm, but still felt safe enough inside it. The third level of awareness is full existential awareness. At this level of awareness, the illusion of invulnerability breaks down. At this level of awareness, we are not merely aware of the ontological givens, but we also realize that we are too part of them. We reach the understanding that these ontological givens are related to us personally. This level of awareness is the result of the shift from the ontological to the eotic, from the understanding that no matter how I turn it, I myself am doomed to die and to experience loss. I myself am an isolated creature. I myself am living in a meaningless world, and I myself am a free creature who is responsible for my life. This level of awareness may be found, for example, in the biblical story of Ecclesiastes, where it says, "The wise have eyes in their heads, while the fool walks in the darkness." But I came to realize that the same fate overtakes them both. Such level of awareness provokes, unsurprisingly, existential anxiety. Continuing this line of thought, we can define existential anxiety as the feeling of unease that accompanies the break of the illusion of being ontologically invulnerable. The more aware we are, the more anxious we are. Hence, we can say that where the level of existential awareness is at its highest, the level of existential anxiety is at its highest too. And where the level of existential anxiety is uppermost, the greatest existential courage is needed. Let me therefore define existential courage as follows. Existential courage is the ability to tolerate one's awareness of being ontologically vulnerable and still agreeing to keep on living with this level of awareness. Answering the question whether one is existentially courageous can only be answered by oneself. The level of existential courage cannot be evaluated by what is seen from the outside, nor by looking at the actual actions one takes or avoids taking in one's life. Overt behavior does not necessarily disclose what is going on behind the scenes, nor reveal one's level of existential awareness. If we accept that existential courage is the ability to tolerate our awareness of being ontologically vulnerable and still live with this level of awareness, then we must search for the real level of existential awareness that lies within us. Likewise, you cannot judge other people's level of authenticity by looking at the choices they make. It is their ability to accept their freedom to choose that defines their level of authenticity. The same principle applies to existential courage. It is not the disclosed act that tells us how existentially courageous we are. Rather, it is our level of existential awareness that reveals how existentially courageous we are. If we are honest enough with ourselves while having our inner dialogues, then we can find the answer to the self-question, am I existentially courageous? As to the question of whether one is born existentially courageous or not, allow me to tell you that the answer is no. We are not thrown into this world with a prior understanding of the ontological givens. We discover them throughout our life. We are not born existentially courageous. What we all do have is the potential of becoming existentially courageous. As long as we agree and are capable of containing the highest level of existential awareness. Finally, a few more words about therapy. Existential therapy is indeed a space that requires a great deal of existential courage. People often come to therapy when they experience the transition from the second level of awareness, that was the safe enough level of awareness, to the third level of awareness, that was the full existential awareness. One of the things we do in existential therapy is helping people understand that their challenging personal ontic experience is the way through which the ontological events manifest themselves in their own personal life. Hence, existential therapy invites us to stay at the highest level of existential awareness. The therapeutic existential dialogue, therefore, requires existential courage from both the client and the therapist. If we are not agreeing to experience the highest level of existential awareness, existential courage will not be able to arise in our practice. Thank you.
Wonderful. And so we're going to also hear our third presenter, Yaqui Martinez Robles, who has a master's degree and a PhD in psychotherapy. He is an existential phenomenological therapist in private practice in Mexico City, and he's the founder of the Circle of Studies in Existential Therapy in Mexico and Colombia, where he offers training and master's degree in existential psychotherapy. He's an honorary president of the ALPE, of the Latin American Association of Existential Therapy, and we are very happy that he was able to come all the way from Mexico to be here in Greece.
I try to, well, first, thank you, Eugenia, for the invitation. And I want to thank Gideon and Emmy, too, for sharing this table. And to you, because you are here. Thank you for sharing this morning with us. I will try to keep it short, because I would like to spend some time, maybe if we like it, to discussing and sharing different positions or different thoughts, because our two previous presenters give us very insightful and very deep thoughts about all of these that maybe move something in us that we can share, we can ask, or we can just comment about it and go deep with a group discussion of that, right? So, but what I would like to tell you is maybe a little bit like if I am the devil advocate, devil's advocate, maybe. Because when I try to reflect about courage, the first thing that appears to my mind is that the first thing that appears to my mind is that the word courage can have confusing meanings, a lot of confusing meanings, and I want to show you the meaning in Spanish. You know, in Spanish we use the word coraje as synonymous of rage. So this can be very confusing, you know, especially for those who speak Spanish, because for us this looks like something not necessarily nice, you know, the courage. So these kind of dialogues for me are very important because we have the opportunity to clarify a little bit our understandings of this aspect, important aspect of human beings. It is a concept that appears even in Plato's dialogues. Appears in a dialogue called, I don't know how do you say this, laches. Laches. Okay. You think so? Okay. Something like that. In Mexico we call it laches. It's the name of one of the characters in the dialogue. And during the dialogue, they try to define, to understand what is courage. What is courage? And what I love the most of the dialogue, the Plato's dialogue, is that they end without a definition. They cannot define what is courage. And in the dialogue was Socrates and the father. Laches is the father. He wanted to Socrates teach courage to his son, but they try to define. But what is this? What is courage? And they cannot define it. This is very inspiring for me. I like the ambiguity. I like these things that we cannot make this absolute definition. I think this is beautiful of our humanity. So, since the Plato's dialogue, we have this feeling of ambiguity about courage. For the Greeks, it was something like an unreflecting, the ancient Greeks, of course. Suddenly I remember, oh my God, I'm in Greece. For the ancient Greeks, it was a kind of unreflective striving towards something that is noble. It's something noble in this. And for the Stoics, as Emmy showed us, is something very important that we needed, we must have it. Courage to live, to confront the difficulties of life. In the Middle Ages, courage became a characteristic of nobility. For Nietzsche, courage is like the power of life to affirm life itself in spite of the ambiguity. And I like something that Paul Tillich also said, that an understanding of courage presupposes an understanding of man and of his world, its structures and values. So it is important, at least to reflect, what is courage for us? What does it mean for us to have courage, to feel courage? But, here is where maybe I can be like the devil's advocate. And maybe because I have this rebel tendency to avoid any kind of imposition, especially if there is like a moral imposition. My hair, it's because of that. And let me show you something about me. It's a play, but it's some of my personality maybe, that I like to use glasses in this way. So, please have a little bit patience with me. And maybe also it's because I came from Latin America. And Latin American countries, we suffer a lot of colonialism for centuries. And different kinds of colonialism. So maybe that is one of the reasons, because I have this tendency to feel a little bit rebel to anything that smells a little bit to a moral imposition. So, I'm afraid that in our enthusiasm, we could turn this possibility in obligation. And it's very easy, it's very subtle to do this. Turning aspiration into obligation. Something mandatory with the weight of some kind of moral superiority. You must be courage. In order to be a good human being, have courage. Courage to live, existential courage. Make me feel a little bit uncomfortable. Even if we call existential to this kind of courage, I think we need to be careful not to fall into the common tendency to turn the novel into a requirement, to turn the possibility into a demand. And with that, turn description, is very important for us as existential therapists, description. But we can turn description into prescription and therapy into morality. And for me, it's very important to be aware of this, that yes, existential courage is important. Yes, as Emmy and Gideon tell us before, it's very important. But at the same time, we need to be really aware of this possibility, that we subtly move from a description to a prescription. That is my main concern. And this actually is one of the aspects that I really like about existential therapy. That in existential therapy, this room is a very good example. We tend to be very open to differences, very open to different kind of perspectives. So this is a very important thing, that we can be open and not try to impose our perspective over the others. So this is an aspect very important for me. I hope you can forgive me for that. But for me, it's important to consider existential courage just as a possibility. Too much alcohol last night. We are in Greece, why not? Right?
We call that Dutch courage.
I prefer to consider existential courage just as a possibility, as good as any other existential possibility. So, and at the same time, perhaps existential courage, at least as a possibility, is something already present in us, regardless of whether we seek it or not. Maybe. Because, let me shut down this. At least give us the opportunity to reflect, to make a pause, and say, okay, what is courage for me? And do I feel in some way like with an imposition about this? Do I feel rebel about this? Do I need to feel more courage in my life? Do I think it's something very important for me, for my clients? How do I interpret this topic when I work with my clients? Like, I can become like a motivator, like, you can do it, come on, you can do it. Or with a more open space, like, how do you feel it? How is for you? So, how is for you? Thank you.
Thank you for your presentations, all of you. I'm aware of time, and I want to leave some time in order for you also maybe to ask a question or to make a comment. But I wanted to share a little bit of my thoughts as well. Thukydides writes that freedom is what brings happiness, and courage is what brings freedom. So since I was very young, I struggled with the issue of freedom. I really wanted to be free. And this is what drove me to existential psychotherapy and the third movement in psychology. Because I didn't want to feel determined. I didn't want to feel determined by my biology, or I didn't want to feel determined by my environment. So I believed very much in willpower. But the question was always in my mind, what brings willpower? And I think Gideon addressed this a little bit. Are we born with this willpower? Or is it something that we learn on the way and we train ourselves? And of course, life trains us as well. And particularly our environment also is very important for that. So when I was still in undergraduate school, I was very interested in developmental psychology. And one of the things I have been working on for many years is this kind of an existential developmental model of how we can integrate the different developmental stages and the different developmental theories into our understanding of existence. Not trying to box in everybody in stages or to say that this is how things go, but I was very much impressed with Erikson's theory, among other theories as well. And one of the things that struck me the most was, first of all, that he starts with the first stage being trust versus mistrust, as you might all know, which really depends on this initial bond with our mother and whether we feel safe and whether we have a secure attachment, which sort of seems to be proven as years go by from neuroscience as well, that our attachment to our very caretaker is very important for feelings of safety and security. But what he also mentions in these psychosocial stages is during the second year of life, we develop this virtue of will, as he says. And our struggle is between autonomy versus feelings of shame and doubt. And later on I added fear. Because I think that our ability to really face life in a courageous way and to be independent and autonomous, as a psychoanalyst friend of mine says, starts in the family, starts from very early on. So although it is very important for us to have a secure attachment with our caretaker and to feel safe and nested in our family and our environment, it is also very important that we are encouraged to break this bond and to fly with our own wings, which very often, especially here in Greece, with, as you might know, Greek mothers are very attached to their children and have somewhat of a difficulty in letting go. Of course, I don't think it's only Greek mothers that have difficulty letting go. But it is especially true here until very recently also, because motherhood was the basic meaning in life for most women. So most women would have great difficulty finding a role or finding a place in life if they were not mothers. This was what they were, what was all about, getting married and have children and having a family. So it's very difficult to let go. I think this is a process that we're all learning in life, how to set someone free and give them the necessary feeling of self-esteem and self-security so that they can feel they can make it in life, right? That they can stand on their own 2 feet, which is very interesting because symbolically, Erickson puts it in the second year of life, because that's physically also the time that we start to walk and talk and to really have more of an autonomy in our physical being. But this autonomy in our physical being is also something that creates more and more of this feeling of self-sufficiency. And are we self-sufficient? And how self-sufficient are we? So I think that courage, Emmy, I think, put it very nicely, and Gideon as well, is not something that means that we are not afraid or that we are not shying away, but from certain dangerous situations. We should, if they are dangerous. Fear is a natural response to danger. But the question is to be realistic about what we're really afraid of. And sometimes we see, especially in our modern world, that we have excessive fears. And one of the things I wanted to just bring to our attention is what is happening right now in our world. Because my feeling is that, at least here in Greece, we're constantly bombarded with scary news, with everything terrible happening in the world. And there are a lot of terrible things happening in the world. I'm not saying there are no terrible things happening in the world. There are wars, there is climatic change, there is artificial intelligence, as Alexis was saying, and as I'm reading more and more about. So there are terrible things happening, but I'm sure there are also wonderful things happening. And we very rarely hear about the wonderful things that are happening to our world. And sometimes I do wonder why. Why the news have nothing nice to say about what is happening to the world. And one of my thoughts is that people are more controllable when they're scared. So I think that we're living in an age where fear is being cultivated. And we have to sort of stand up and find the courage to say no to fear. Say no to this unnecessary fear, or to be constantly living with all of the negative things in life, because there are so many also wonderful things in life, like you being all here and also all being able to share today about